Hey, ocean travelers around the world. This is the Flying Dutchman, the ghost ship sailors still swear they see. When cold fronts, hard seas, and human eyes line up just right, a phantom hull appears against the night. Legend says cursed, physics says look again. The gale hits the Cape of Good Hope like a drummer who won't quit. A watch on a square rigger braces knees against wet planks, eyes locked on a horizon that keeps breaking and reforming out of black water and blown spray. A full rig silhouette seems to rise, sails set, but not pulling, hull too high above the skyline to make sense. No shout, no cannon, no wake. Just a ship, sailing where no ship should be. Across time and miles, a North Sea trawler runs a night tow, while the crew stares at a luminous shape sliding across the bow masts, yards, and a pale hull that gives off light, as if it were a lantern made of wood. Radios call into the dark, nothing answered. In a different decade, a container captain steps into a modern bridge, lit by soft screens and steady numbers. AIA's plots ships like chess pieces. The sea outside looks empty, until a masted profile shows itself at a bearing the instruments do not confirm. The silhouette holds too steady for a cloud and too tall for a wave. The watch pins time and bearing in the log because that is what seafarers do. 3 seas, 3 sightings, 1 fent. The promise is simple and useful. Follow the famous ghost ship through real logbooks, hard weather, and optical tricks, so a viewer can tell miracle from mirage and learn a few seamanship habits that have kept nerves steady for centuries. The page in ink matters more than the shiver in the spine. In disciplined logs, a sighting becomes data. Time in local or ship's time, bearing to the object, angle above the visible horizon, sea state, wind, barometer, cloud forms. Who else looked and what they said? Officers who grew up under stars and storm fronts knew that memory bends, paper holds. When a crew wrote that a ship passed to windward, height above skyline excessive, they gave later eyes work to do. When a lookout added that the object showed no return on the set, in the radar era, that line became a thread connecting instruments to the human eye. The old habit, write, don't dramatize, turns ghost talk into study material. A Royal Navy training cruise in 1881 logged a sighting with enough detail to live in collections today, not because anyone wanted to sell a scare, but because the practice of writing down weather and wonders was part of the job. The myth floats on stories, but the investigation stands on sentences with bearings, distances, and witnesses. The legend that blew in with the trade winds tells of a Dutch captain who swore he would round the Cape if it took him until the world ended. The storm did not care about vows. The ship did not survive or survive too well, depending on who told the tale. The curse said the captain and crew were condemned to sail forever, their masts and yards appearing to the living as a warning or an omen. Versions changed with ports and centuries. Sometimes the crew begged for letters to be delivered to families long dead. Sometimes the hull dripped with ghostly fire. The cast grew and shrank, but the stage stayed the same. Waters where oceans meet, where winds slam against currents, and where a ship's fate could hinge on a line in the log and a choice at the wheel. That stage is a machine built by geography. Off South Africa, the warm Agulhas current runs down the coast like a river in the sea, fast and smooth and full of heat. Offshore, the cold Benguela current rises from below and slides up the west coast, dense and sharp as a blade. When a strong westerly blows against the Agulhas, waves steepen into walls. When cold air rides over warm water, layers form in the lower atmosphere, like a stack of uneven glass. Those layers bend light. They make distant things loom larger and nearer than they are. They let images travel along the surface and pop back up miles away, hanging above the horizon as if stitched to nothing. The Cape's reputation was earned in broken spars and lost boats, but its talent for optics is just as fierce. Ghost ships cluster where air and water fight. Light has rules. The eye has habits. Put the two together over a cold, hard sea, and the brain does the rest. Superior mirages, born when cooler, denser air sits over warmer layers, near the surface, refract light downward. To the eye, that twist lifts the image up. A ship hull below the horizon can be bent into view, stacked, stretched, or flipped. Fata Morgana, the showiest member of the family, builds a skyline out of slices, inverted, erect, smeared, and doubled. Rigging turns into towers. Hulls become cliffs. The whole apparition can wobble, change height, or lock into place for long minutes, if the layers are stable. None of this needs an equation to feel true. Anyone who has watched a spoon look broken in a glass of water has seen refraction lie without malice. Over the sea, the glass fills the space between clouds and waves, and the lie grows grand. A lighthouse can become a fleet if fog helps. Distant beams that ride the air near the surface smear into vertical strokes as they pass through moisture. The smears march and shift as waves heave, and a watcher who expects masts will see masts. The loom of the sea, the way light seems to lift beyond the horizon before the object itself is visible, adds to the parade. On certain nights, the loom paints a faint ship shape where only a point light lives. On others, the loom makes a black ship look brighter than the water behind it. Old keepers wrote of such tricks without drama. They did not call them ghosts, they called them weather. Other glows share the stage and complicate the picture without touching the legend's core. St. Elmo's fire can sit on a masthead as a blue-violet crown when the air carries charge. Bioluminescence can turn wakes into milky rivers and hulls into phantom lanterns. A trawler that cut through a bloom on a moonless night might swear the sea lit the planks from below. These are natural dramas. They make the eye widen, the breath slow, and the mood of a watch deepen. Add a mirage above and a glowing wake below, and a steady ship can feel like it sailed into a story that was waiting for it. Brains, under long watches, do what brains do. Fatigue loosens focus. Night vision tosses color and lives on contrast. Rain streaks glass. Wipers time the scene into beats. Stress builds patterns from fragments because patterns help with survival. A single mast shape seen between swells, smeared by refraction, rimmed in glow, becomes a full rig in a mind that knows masts and rigs. None of this says a watcher is foolish. It says a watcher is human and practiced at turning half information into whole pictures. The sea rewards that talent most of the time. Sometimes it hands out illusions as a test. Logs from the age of sail keep a handful of sightings alive because the entries are specific enough to hold weight. A bark rounding the Cape writes, "A ship was seen to windward, rising and falling above the line of the sea, her lower masts not visible. She seemed to carry royals in a hard blow. Bearings are noted. The sea state is very high. The watch keeps eyes on the spot until changing light flattens the effect. Later, analysis says that a vessel beyond the geometric horizon was ducted into view by a strong temperature inversion, and that the apparent height of sails was a stacked mirage, erect over inverted building a mast taller than the original. Another case puts the Phantom over banks in the North Sea, where cold air lays over a warmer surface. A few minutes of sharp visibility turn into a calm outline, floating like a ship in the sky. No one puts down a spyglass and claims a curse. They write the weather, the view, and the choice to hold course. Steam and steel did not end the sightings. A tramp steamer reports a bark A-beam too high by far, at the edge of a winter low. The engine hum holds steady. The radio stays quiet. The captain picks up a pencil and notes the drop in temperature across a squall line, the wind backing, and a sudden super clean band of air under a lid of colder flow. The Phantom tracks with the weather, not with any known vessel. It fades when the squall eases. Early radio and later radar did not catch those refractions because nothing solid sat in the spot where the eye saw the ship. Instruments are literal. The atmosphere is creative. Modern bridges with IS GPS and tight radars still host Dutchman because mirages bend light, not radio waves. An officer sights a masted profile that should not exist. Screens say no. The safer habit is to believe both, but to let the instruments drive the collision avoidance decisions while the eyes stay open for real traffic, near and far. A phantom with no return is a good clue that the air is layered, and that ranging errors can sneak into visual judgments. A real ship with a return under a duct can also appear shifted in height, which is why bearing checks and radar ranges make the difference between a story and a close call. Why Dutchman and not Spaniard, Englishman, or whoever was out there tonight? The trading routes of a Dutch golden age ran straight through the Cape's gauntlet. Crews from many tongues saw impossible ships. A Dutch captain's oath and fate got the headline, and held it because the origin ports told and retold it, in the same way people share any good useful story, useful because it warned hands to respect the Cape and to take weather personally. The Dutch East India Company's pattern out with the trades, down the Atlantic, across the Cape, up the Indian Ocean, made those waters a main stage for both prosperity and disaster. Sailors hung a name on a phenomenon, because names make sharing easy. Regional cousins grew their own faces. Off Scandinavian coasts, fishermen spoke of a light ship that appeared before storms blew too hard to fish. In Brittany, a ship of the dead walked a line of surf under certain moons. Not a curse, just the way certain fogs and low beams made spindrift carry light like canvas. In the Pacific, islanders gave their own names to mirage fleets that rose at dawn, hot air showing cool ships from beyond bends in the globe. None of those stories stole anything from the Cape's Dutchman. All of them underlined a shared human habit, make poetry out of physics and pass it down as advice. Culture kept the sails full long after wooden hulls gave way. Painters put a black ship against a horizon that looked like a bruise. Ballads gave the captain a voice that carried in pubs and on forecastles. An opera turned the legend into a storm of music, where vows and winds collided. Popular prints and headlines, somewhere between journalism and theater, stamped the silhouette into minds that might never stand a watch. In all of that telling, the good versions kept two rules. They loved the sea for what it is, and they respected sailors for what they do. Not every ghost ship in a story is a mirage. The ocean does set real derelicts loose. Storms, fires, and abrupt abandonments create hulls that drift silent and dangerous, without lights or radios. A dark ship half swamped and wallowing can become a true phantom on a black night. Instruments or not, logs from many eras include entries like vessel without signs of life, avoided at close range, reported by radio, or small craft adrift recovered at dawn. These real derelicts fed the larger myth without any help from optics, and they underline a watch officer's prime directive: treat every silhouette as real until proven otherwise. Legend is entertainment. Collision is physics. A friendly dive into optics helps the mind hold what the eye sees. Picture the lower atmosphere as a layered cake. Each layer has its own temperature. When the layer nearest the sea is warmer than the layer above, light passing from cool into warm bends downward. If the bend is strong enough, the light follows the curvature of the earth for a while. Images that would normally fall into the sea before reaching an eye ride that bent path and show up again, elevated and altered. Tall masts appear first because the highest parts of distant ships stick into layers that have the clearest path for refraction. Holes can vanish while sails stand on nothing. In strong inversions, inverted images stack under erect ones. A ship can look like a lace of rigging in a city of glass. This sounds like a glitch. It is just air behaving like water in a glass, scaled up to the size of a coastline. A spoon looks broken because light changes speed in water. A ship looks too tall because light changes path in layered air. The Cape is not the only factory for such tricks. Bass Strait, between mainland Australia and Tasmania, becomes a hall of mirrors when hot winds roll over cold water. North Sea banks, under certain spring conditions, build ducts that carry images of trawlers into the sky like pressed flowers. Labrador fog lines can do something similar at dawn, making black hulls into translucent shadows that drift just above the horizon. Subpolar fronts, anywhere on Earth, can lay cold air over warm and sharp lines that run for miles, the kind of day when mariners talk about seeing far, without knowing yet that the view is a little too good to be true. A calm checklist turns any sighting into a useful entry rather than a campfire tale. Time to the minute. Bearing to the object. Estimated angle above the visible horizon, half a finger. 1 finger too, held at arm's length, is good enough for later math. Sea state, wind direction and strength, barometer trend. Air temperature at deck level and at eye level if a second thermometer is handy. The difference tells a lot about layers. Cloud forms, are there hard anvils, low stratus, clear or haze. Radar range and AS targets if any. A quick pan with a phone from horizon to object, to horizon again, slow enough that someone later can see the path through the view. Traffic control calls, if safety demands. The point isn't to prove the Dutchman, it is to give the next watch and the next ship practical notes. Human voices always carry these subjects better than diagrams. A navigator who stood watches off the Cape once said, "We saw a ship above the skyline," and the old man said, "Write it down, then look for the warm air that's lying to you." We found both. A lighthouse keeper along a fog-heavy coast wrote, "The beam threw sails into the mist. The town said the Dutchman called, and I said the lens did the calling." A trawler skipper in a winter fishery said, "A cutter crossed our bow that wasn't there." We slowed for a minute, checked the screens, then carried on. Good lesson, no drama. An optical physicist who visits ports to give weather talks tells crews, "Superior mirage is not superior to you. It's just more of the same. If it looks high, ask the air why." Each voice hands the viewer the right mood. Curious, not spooked. Precise, not fussy. Seamanship takeaways fit in a pocket. If a phantom shows and the instruments disagree, collision avoidance still comes first. Slow a touch, widen CPA. Call on the radio if a hull might be real. Keep bearings and ranges honest. Expect distance illusions in ducting conditions, and let radar and AIS lead decisions while eyes hunt for the thing that made the mind so sure. In small craft, treat mirage days as extra margin days around headlands and shoals, because cliffs and bars can also loom or hide in strange ways. Watch out for this. Looming can make distant breaking water look deceptively near and gentle. It is not. It is just tall. Pop culture gets 2 gold stars and 1 gentle correction. Paintings and sea ballads that show a ship hung above a horizon, too tall and too calm, carry the truth better than many scientific posters. A certain opera nailed the feeling of crews who argue with weather and promise too much to the wind. Later blockbusters that turn the Dutchman into a monster miss the point. The sea does not need monsters. It needs witnesses who know what they're seeing and how to act on it. Myth and reality sit well together if someone simply says what belongs in each column. Cursed ship versus refracted silhouette. Bad omen versus weather warning. Fate versus physics. All 3 pairs point the same useful end. Learn the signs, honor the logs, adjust the course, and keep the old story as a way to remember what layers of air can do to light and what layers of experience can do to nerves. Lightning-fast answers keep curiosity from piling up. Why do masts show first? Because the highest parts of distant ships lie in layers that refract light along the surface best. The hull sits behind the curve and stays hidden. Can radar see a mirage? Radar bounces off physical objects. A mirage is bent light, not a target, so radar will not plot a ghost. Can a mirage last an hour? Yes. If the inversion stays steady, some hold for longer. Why mostly at the Cape? Because that is where strong currents, steep temperature gradients, and winds put on their best show. Other places can do it too, just with different moods. Do multiple witnesses prove it? They prove it was striking. They do not make a duct into a deck. Small snapshots help the mind carry all this without strain. A brig seems to sail above the skyline. The wind backs, and the ship folds back into the line like a card slipping into a deck. A rig appears inverted, hull in the sky and masts below, like a reflection hung without a lake. A silent cutter slides across a trawler's imagined path. The trawler's crew scans hard and finds nothing but air that smells of rain. A lighthouse's ship becomes a bright loom when fog lifts for a breath, and the true beam shows. A black hull fades when a wind shift shreds the inversion. The scene drops like a curtain. A dawn phantom looks perfect for 10 minutes, and then dissolves into low cloud, the color of pewter. Modern field guides say much with few lines. If someone wants a clean way to document the Dutchman without hype, the steps are simple. Note air temperatures at deck and at eye level if possible. To sense the inversion, snap a horizon reference so later minds can see how high the image sat. Pan slowly. Let the sea show the scale. Log the bearing and any instrument returns or the lack of them. Share the note with others who work the same waters. Good data beats good drama. The narrative circles back to the cold open, because the first chapter still holds the cleanest image. A ship in the sky, a silent hull, a watch that knows the sea well enough to write more than it fears. In an age where screens speak constantly, the old habit of looking long and writing clearly keeps its shape. The Dutchman that sailors still swear they see is not a failure of sense. It is a success of attention. It says that the ocean has more ways to show itself than one set of instruments can catch, and that people belong in the loop, steady and awake. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really enjoy and want to fall asleep with ocean stories whenever you want. The sentence continues as if nothing paused, because the sea never pauses for long. The phantom off the bow holds a minute more, then thins into plain air as the ship passes through a band of warmer wind that breaks the optical path. The watch writes, "Effect ended" under the earlier note and sets a fresh bearing line to a real freighter, walking on the horizon with a name someone can read. The night returns to work. A legend returns to its waiting place, ready for the next time air, water and human eyes agree to put on a calm show. The same pattern repeats in other waters, and wherever it repeats, the details grow useful. A bark in the roaring 40s takes a slanting sea that makes the deck creak low in the troughs. The lookout reports a rig that seems to float above the line of water, with a neat topgallant where no pure horizon should allow it. The officer of the watch raises a glass, sees the masts rise and fall with no hull below, and orders a steady course rather than a dramatic one. He notes the bearing twice. Across 20 minutes, the angle above the horizon shrinks as the vessel changes her own position. The phantom slides down, then vanishes as if it found a door and used it. A calm voice on a calm night can make the strangest scene feel like another line in a very long book. Older case notes often mention temperature without saying why. A careful quartermaster would write that the air felt strange warm at the rail and pinch cold at the face. That difference matters. Warm surface air under a cold lid turns the lower atmosphere into a lens. The lens can be broad, covering miles, or narrow, running like a ribbon along a front. When the lens is broad, a ghost ship can hold position with eerie patience. When the lens is narrow, the phantom jumps, jitters, or splits, as the band slides over waves and the viewing ship crosses invisible seams. The behavior says more about air than about spirits. Logs from the age of steam capture the first moments when instruments and illusions share a room. A freighter in the South Atlantic records tall masts to the east, no target on new set. The new set is a radar with better resolution than the one retired last season. The screen shows a clean field. The eye insists on a ship. The captain chooses to slow and expand separation around that bearing, not because he trusts the ghost more than the set, but because a vessel that sees a thing should behave as if it could be solid until traffic is no longer at risk. 10 minutes later, the masts break into fragments, resolve into black cloud stalks, and then smear into flat dawn. The log gets 2 lines that matter to the next bridge team. Superior mirage observed, ducting likely, return negative. The phrase carries no drama, it carries intelligence. North Sea trawlers have their own version of the Dutchman, and the stories hold steady across generations. Crews talk about winter evenings, when a cutter seems to move without sound across a net path. The smart response is always the same. Get eyes on the net markers, check the screens, call with plain words if any risk exists. Then let a minute pass before resuming tow. The difference between superstition and seamanship is only ever this. Superstition wants theater, seamanship wants time and space. On a night of clear air, after a week of gales, a container ship on the Agulhas Shelf sees a city rise, where there is no land. The skyline has towers and sharp roofs, all thin and gray and too consistent for cloud. This is Fata Morgana, in its architectural mood. Low islands, or a ship convoy beyond the curve, have been stretched and mirrored into a floating town. Watchkeepers slow their steps as they watch it hold, then change shape, then crumble with the same stillness with which it rose. Someone writes a note on whipped cream left too long. Illusions fall fastest when the layers that hold them up start to mix. Waves kicked by opposing winds can do that mixing. A downburst from a decaying cell can do it too. The eye returns to the honest horizon as soon as the air stops channeling. A lighthouse keeper along a fog-prone coast once wrote of a brig that would not die. The light's own beam made vertical strokes in the mist that from the gallery resembled thin sails. The keeper watched as the strokes hardened into a shape that could have passed to a hurried mind for a ship bearing down. No bell rang, because no bell should ring for mist behaving as physics says it will. The keeper simply turned to the page, set down time and weather, and then stayed at the window until fog thinned enough to let the far point wink through. Small disciplines make legends behave. Quick fact: the sea's curvature hides more ships than it reveals. If an officer sees only the upper masts of a vessel, the topmost part sits in layers of air that carry light farther than the lower parts can manage. Tall equals early. That is why crews wrote royals showing before they wrote courses. It is also why some apparitions look like perfect rigs in the sky. The sail plan is the first part that refraction rescues, and the mind fills blank spaces with cloth it has seen 1,000 times. On certain cold mornings, the reverse trick plays. Inferior mirage. The cousin's quieter sibling appears when warm air sits over colder water. Light then bends upward as it passes through the boundary. A ship can look shorter than it is, as if heat pressed it down. The same physics is at work, just flipped. In those conditions, a watcher might miss a low hull in a haze, and that is a safety lesson without any romance attached. Crews who work those lanes learn to trust instruments hard when visual ranges play such games. There are testimonies in ship museums that carry this debate with warm hands. A navigator's diary from the 19th century reads, "Saw a ship travel above the line of the world. The master said, 'It's the air that is wrong, not your eyes. Write what you saw and what the air felt like.' The split between awe and habit sits in that one sentence. Awe makes an officer want to tell a story. Habit makes the officer log the barometer. Humidity, wind veer and sea skin. The best bridges allow both things to happen in order. Quiet astonishment first, tidy note second." Even in the satellite era, a dash of folklore still keeps crews attentive. A junior officer hears from a veteran that the Dutchman is a weather teacher in disguise, and the phrase sticks. On days when towering cumulus mushrooms high before noon and the surface runs warm over colder streams, minds primed by that phrase act sooner. They call squall lines earlier, plot wider, and stand off cluttered lanes by a margin that turns accidents into anecdotes. A legend that teaches a safer habit earns its passage in any age. Let's go step by step through a few how it looks patterns that reappear so often they might as well be sketched on the back of every logbook. 1. The floating city. This shows as a series of shelf-like layers, each slightly offset, sometimes inverted between erect pieces. The edges look rigid because refraction flattens curves into straight lines. 2. The ship on a pedestal. A perfect rig sits on a strip of gray air that looks like a sandbar in the sky. The strip is just the duct where the image rides. 3. The upside-down double. A mast appears to grow downwards, while the original grows up. The mirror plane lies somewhere invisible between. 4. The creeping cliff. A hull becomes a black bluff that slides laterally along the horizon as the duct carries a distant coastline into view. Anyone who learns these 4 pictures will recognize the 5th when it arrives, because the brain loves families of form. A little bit of biological reality belongs here. Night vision runs on rod cells, which respond best to blue-green light and suffer from a lack of detail. Cone cells that handle fine detail and color take a back seat in darkness. Result: at night, lines and blocks rule. Small objects lose depth, halos win. Rain on glass adds texture that the brain tries to subtract. When the brain fails to subtract at all, the leftover becomes a trick of shape and motion that feeds the legend. None of this is a failure. It is the operating system of the eye doing the best it can with low signal and wind noise. There are modern human voices who keep the tone exactly right. A South African Coast Guard officer who gives safety talks to fishing crews says, "If you see a ship in the sky, use it to check your distances. Ducting is a liar. Let your radar tell you where other boats really are." A polar deckhand who has watched mirages over leads of open water and sea ice says, "The pressure ridges look like cities, and then you find they're a line of hummocks. It's pretty. It's not a place to drive a snowcat fast." An optical scientist who rides on research cruises says to watchkeepers, "If the horizon looks ragged when the air is otherwise clean, you are probably inside a lens. Expect surprises." Consider a field scene with all the elements in play. A research vessel runs south in a pressure pattern that brought cold air off land out over the shelf. The sea temperature at the skin reads 6 degrees warmer than the wind. 2 meters up, the bridge wing thermometer differs from the chart table thermometer by 3 degrees. That simple detail written in the margin has big consequences. It means the lower layer is supportive of ducting. It means the watch should not overtrust line of sight range to an object that presents more height than logic allows. It means a ship passing through the same zone in the opposite direction might see different illusions at different times, even when separated by only a few miles. A single line in the log seals the lesson. Inversion present, visual distances untrustworthy. Stories will always include the famous Dutchman letter scenes, where a ghostly messenger begs living sailors to carry messages to families long dead. A museum curator who cataloged ballads organized those by themes: grief without closure, the desire to reverse time, and the way the sea eats history quietly. That curator reminded visitors that such motifs comforted people who waited at home and also kept crews alert in violent seasons. A tale that says some fates last forever can provoke an extra lash taken tight before a gale, and that extra lash keeps a spar from slamming and a man from being flung. If poetry leads to careful hands, even poetry has a place on a bridge. There is also a habit of confusing bioluminescence with phantoms that deserves a quick, clean line. When plankton bloom bright, a wake becomes a milky trail that seems to paint the sea from below. Sometimes the luminosity hugs a hull's boundary layer and outlines a form moving in darkness that can look, to a tired mind, like a second vessel pacing just out of sight. Watch out for this. Bioluminescence tends to follow motion. It blooms brighter where turbulence is strongest. A true phantom ship in the sky lives above the horizon and changes shape with air, not with water. The difference is angle and behavior. A captain's seminar at a maritime academy once used a tabletop demonstration that, for all its simplicity, left the room silent. A glass of water, a spoon, a pencil, The spoon looked broken when half in and half out of the water. The pencil, pressed into the glass at a slant, doubled at its own reflection off the inner surface. The instructor said nothing until a student said, "So the sea can do this, but bigger." The instructor nodded and added a line that has served as a pocket-size instruction manual ever since. When the world looks wrong, assume it's the air. Global patterns and sightings tell a clean story. The Cape is the headline because it's the most dramatic meeting of opposing currents and violent air. Bass Strait between Victoria and Tasmania is a steady second because hot northerlies over cold southerlies make fat inversions. The North Sea wins on repetition because shallow banks and different air masses slide over each other like pages. Labrador and the Grand Banks show seasonal runs of mirage mornings and ice melt seasons, when the air's cold tongue sits over warmer water. Even in tropical zones, edges river plumes that run cooler than surrounding seas at dusk, for example, can set up local ducting lanes that float a distant freighter for a few quiet minutes. Once a navigator learns to mark the edges where air changes its mind, the map becomes alive with places where the Dutchman has a standing invitation. Derelicts, the real ghost ships, deserve one more clear case, because people sometimes mix categories. A small coastal freighter catches fire in fair weather, is abandoned, and does not sink. It drifts. Weeks later, a fishing crew on a moonless night cuts a lazy S-curve between banks and meets a black hull without lights hanging off the bow at short range. That is not mirage. That is a collision risk. The right reactions follow in a rhythm that comes from drill, throttle, helm, call, report, mark. In the morning, the same hull, now spotted by an aerial patrol, is towed. In port bars that night, the story reads as Dutchman came to call, but the log reads as derelict encountered and reported. Both versions spread, and both do the work they're built to do. One binds people to the romance of their trade, the other keeps the trade safe. It helps to end this middle stretch with 6 postcards that carry weight without needing footnotes. A brig appears above the skyline, like a page from an old book held up against the night. A lucky smooth patch of air holds the image steady long enough for the watch to drink it in. A rig inverts, with sails where water should be and water where sky belongs. A junior seaman points with a grin and learns a new word in return. A silent cutter crosses a trawler's imagined path. The trawler eases, checks instruments, then smiles as the cutter dissolves into gray. A lighthouse ship turns into pure beam when fog slides a little higher and the sails vanish like breath. A black hull stays visible, despite no return until the wind lifts and the duct collapses. The horizon goes flat, the mind goes quiet. A dawn apparition looks like a convoy heading out, complete with little smudges that could be smoke. The sun climbs, the air stirs, the convoy becomes a line of low cloud above a bank that always sits there, honest and unmoving. Recap is near but not yet. First, a quick field guide version of how to write the page. Modern crews appreciate. The narrator reminds viewers that a usable note includes temperature at deck and at head height, pressure trend, wind, sea state, cloud type, and the observed angle and bearing. If a hand has no protractor, a finger at arm's length is a good instrument. A little under 2 degrees per finger width on most hands, good enough to estimate how high the phantom sat. Photos, if taken, should begin at the horizon, roll into the object slowly, and return to the horizon, so later minds can measure the lens's tricks. There is no award for catching a ghost. There is respect for helping the next watch understand what the air is doing. Now the recap can land cleanly, the way a good log ends a watch with a tight line. Sailors gave the famous phantom a name, because names help people share warnings. Weather builds the stage, with currents that fight and air that layers into a lens. Optics shape the scene into ships that fly, cities that float, and masts that appear on pedestals. Good seamanship reads the scene, writes the page, steers with wider margins, and lets instruments lead when the air lies. The Dutchman becomes not a curse, but a course correction, a reminder that the eye is great at pattern, and the sea is great at tricks. The ending of this second movement belongs to the same calm, late-night tone that carried the beginning. A watch team on a modern bridge stands easy while a line of squalls writes a charcoal smear along the far water. The horizon grows ragged. For a minute, something tall sits where it should not. No one gasps. Someone notes the time. A pencil circles a bearing. The helmsman keeps the hand light. The phantom thins and slides back into the drawer where all thin things go when the air stirs. The officer adds 2 words under the log entry, "No drama," and the ship keeps carrying gifts and fuel and letters and people across a world that always gives good teachers disguised as legends. The last leg of the story turns to the way people make peace with what they see. On a ferry route far from the Cape, a senior deck officer keeps a small notebook that is not the official log. It holds simple sketches of horizons that looked odd and wind notes that read like short poems. Warm breath on cold glass, ragged edge under a clean sky, city in the air, then gone. The officer shares that notebook with new crew, the way a parent shares a field guide on a first walk. The message underneath the pages is gentle. The sea will play. The job is to notice, write, and steer without fuss. A harbor pilot, invited to speak at a coastal college, tells students that the best trick he ever learned had nothing to do with speed or bravado. It was this: if the horizon looks wrong, do the ordinary things twice, call twice, check twice, and give twice the margin. He says, a phantom cannot sink you, a misread distance can. He mentions, almost as an aside, that many pilots secretly love the nights when mirages show, not because they want ghosts, but because those nights sharpen attention the way a whetstone sharpens a knife. A museum guide stands beside a painting of a dark ship hanging above a gray sea and explains that the artist never saw the Dutchman but knew sailors who had. The brushwork is honest about clouds and water. The ship is drawn too clean, but the height is right. Visitors ask if the story is true. The guide answers, the sea really does lift ships into the sky, and crews really did write it down. The curse is theater. The optics are home. People leave with smiles that look like they learned a magic trick that does not need applause. A long haul captain remembers the first time a junior watchkeeper whispered, "There, at starboard 100. Do you see it?" He did. The captain says he felt a small lift in the chest that was part awe and part the good ache of a puzzle. He ordered nothing dramatic. He walked to the wing, cupped the air with his palm next to the thermometer, and felt the warm layers sit like a shawl on a cold shoulder. He said, "Write the numbers," and the crew wrote them. After, in the mess, he told the oldest story in the least mysterious way possible. The air made a lens. We got a free show. We kept the rules. A trawler in winter drags nets across a shoal that has taken its toll since charts were quills and ink. The radar paints traffic as little bricks of light, and AIS puts names to the bricks. A block of darkness rises above the waterline, where no brick sits. The master leans forward, eyes on the silhouette, and then steps back to scan the screen again. He tells the helmsman to hold course for 30 seconds while he listens to the engine as a kind of clock. By the time the clock counts to half a minute, the block has moved sideways as if pulled by a string across the horizon. The master nods to no one and says, "All right." The deckhand, who is learning what silence can mean in a wheelhouse, says nothing, which means he learned a lot. The shore has its own versions of the lesson. A keeper on a headland in a spring inversion season writes a tally on a scrap taped inside a cupboard. Small ships in the air. 4. Floating cliffs. 2. City 1. The words city once have a circle around them, because that one had been good. A perfect rim of towers trimmed in copper light, so pretty that he wished someone else had been there to see it. Later he showed the scrap to a substitute keeper who had never caught the trick before. The substitute, a person who liked clear categories, looked at the circle and grinned in a way that meant something complicated had just become simple. It is possible to love the legend and choose the physics without tearing either. Crews have always done that. They told the story of an oath at the Cape the way families tell favorite stories at tables where soup is hot and steam rises like fog. They sang a song about a ship that cannot find a home port because a storm remembers an angry promise. Then they stood watch and used bearings and angles like the tools they are. Two truths live side by side. The sea is grand enough for theater. Navigation is strict enough for safety. The human voice returns to the center because, in the end, that is what keeps any tradition honest. A navigator who became a teacher tells a class of cadets, "You will see things that deserve wonder. Write the wonder in your mind, and the numbers on your page. You'll need both when you stand alone someday." A lighthouse docent reading from a journal stops to say, "This sentence is plain because the keeper respected the sea enough to use small words." A trawler skipper, who never much liked speeches, shrugs and says, "It looked like a ship. It wasn't. We fished the next set." That's the whole story. An optical physicist who has spent time at sea laughs at the idea that science and superstition are enemies and says, "They are neighbors. One grows flowers, one keeps tools. The fence is friendly." There is a final practical corner that keeps this subject grounded. How the same layers that trick eyes can bend radio and sound in ways that matter. Ducting can enhance or reduce radio range, make a VHF call carry farther or die early, and sometimes skew expectations for who can hear whom. Surface ducts can also guide sound, so that a whistle seems closer or farther than honest distance would promise. Crews trained to suspect their eyes on inversion nights often learn to suspect their ears, and radios a little too. The right response is not paranoia, it is calibration. They call, they listen, they mark returns, and they treat odd nights as nights to do ordinary things with extra care. In polar seas, mirages are not rare oddities. They are seasonal characters. A deckhand on an icebreaker watching leads open and close learns to see pressure ridges as the ribs of a continent-sized animal breathing. One morning, a lane of open water reflects a low wall of ice so perfectly that the wall lifts and floats. The helmsman slows, not for the ghost but for the fact that the ghost says the air is arranging itself in a way that reduces honest depth cues. A scientist on that same bridge points out a faint dancing line where sky and water meet and explains in a sentence no longer than a breath that the apparent horizon is now a moving target. The crew does not write poetry. They write speed, wind, air, and water temperatures, and the little note that lives on every good page, visibility deceptive. It helps to return to the Cape one last time, if only to let the place close its own chapter. A southwester bent with strength meets the outward flow of the Agulhas, like a hammer brought down onto a river. Short, steep waves make decks into wet rooms with bad furniture. The air stacks in layers because heat does not want to leave the water yet. A ship rounds the point with a caution that borders on tenderness. Someone looks out and sees a rig standing as tall as a lighthouse on a strip of gray that looks like a path to nowhere. The old story wants to be heard. The new practice wants to be followed. The crew holds course, lets instruments lead, and salutes the shape with the same respect they give to porpoises that ride the bow at dawn for no reason but joy. The reason the subject still belongs on screens and in books is simple. Viewers like to be let in on secrets that make the world make sense without making it smaller. Knowing that a ship can appear in the sky because air thins and thickens in vertical stripes does not make the scene any less beautiful. It puts the beauty to work. It turns wonder into a way to keep people safe and to keep stories honest. That is the kind of knowledge that sticks, because it lives in bodies as well as in minds. Hands that ease a wheel, feet that plant for balance, eyes that scan with slightly different priorities when the horizon frays. A child who hears this story in a living room far from salt will carry a picture of a ship in the sky for years. When that child becomes someone who hikes ridges, flies in weather, fishes a bay, or just reads the forecast before a long drive, the picture will come back in a quieter form. It will say, "Sometimes the world will look wrong, Often it will be the air, breathe, measure, move. An older adult who watched the sea decades ago will nod at the same moment because the advice has not aged a day. The Dutchman is a shared language across generations that love or fear the horizon in equal measure. A quick run through common questions wraps loose threads without piling on. Can a phantom ship be photographed? Yes, though cameras struggle. If the air wobbles and the image faintly vibrates with the duct, slow pans and a fixed horizon help. Can two ships in the same spot see the same ghost? If both sit inside the same duct and in the same geometry? Yes, if one is outside the duct, the skies will disagree, and that is a kind of proof for the curious. Can a mirage hide a real ship? It can hide a hull and leave masts, or it can make a low craft hug the line so tightly that a tired eye misses it. This is why instruments and lights were invited to sea in the first place. Can a mirage last the length of a watch? If the inversion holds steady, crew learn to love the moment when a wind shift tears the duct to shreds and everything snaps back into loyal distances. One last field scene pulls the strands snug. A cargo ship steams west at dusk, and the horizon glows with that copper band. That means the day still wants to be part of the story. The helmsman and the watch officer talk softly about family recipes, the way people do when the room is quiet and the weather is good. The officer looks out and sees a shape on a pedestal of gray. The officer does not call for silence or shout orders. The officer glances at the thermometer, glances at the radar, glances at the AIS panel, and waits the space of one breath before marking a bearing. The shape holds and then dissolves. Somewhere on the same ocean, someone in a kitchen points to a map and tells a child about a ship that sometimes sails where air and water pretend. And the child stares with the kind of attention that turns into a habit. The sea earns both moments, the patient bridge and the open mouth. A final, clean recap fits into a single paragraph that travels well in memory. Sailors gave a name to a sight that repeats wherever cold air rides over warm water and layers bend light into lies. The famous ghost ship is what happens when optics get playful, weather gets sharp, and human eyes do their honest work of pattern making. Logs turn legends into lessons by pinning time, bearing and conditions to the page. Instruments do not see mirages, which is why bridge teams trust radar and AIS for collision and use phantoms as a reminder to widen margins and check twice. The story survives because it delivers two gifts at once: a beautiful scene that feels like theater and a practical warning that keeps people measured when horizons turn to velvet tricks. The ending owes nothing to drama and everything to respect. What people owe the Dutchman is the same thing they owe any good sea story that came from work and weather. Learn the sky, honor the logs, love the telling, and let a useful mystery train better hands. The ghost ship that sailors still swear they see is a teacher that arrives without appointment and leaves without complaint. It asks for a pencil, a steady voice, and room to pass. It does not ask to be feared. It asks to be understood. And when a watchkeeper steps out onto a wing and tastes warm air above cool, hears waves chop under a lid of calm wind, and sees a rig ride the line between worlds for a minute, that watchkeeper joins a long line of human beings who looked out, took a breath, and learned again that the ocean speaks in pages and layers. The last quiet fact lands like a buoy bell in easy swell. In a world that loves noise, a mirage can teach silence. And in that silence, good choices get made.